Well, hi, everybody, and welcome to the Cultural Studies Podcast. My name is Toby Miller, and my guest today is.
Eric Hoyt. I am the Call Family Professor of Media Production at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I also have the great privilege of directing our archive here, the Wisconsin Center for Film and Theater Research, and I direct Media History Digital Library. And I'm delighted to be on the podcast. Thank you so much, Toby.
Well, thank you, Eric. Is there any truth to the rumor that business cards have been abandoned because yours was too long in terms of the number of words to fit on it, and so the card wouldn't fit in
Well,
Japanese business people's wallets or something?
I heard that you're responsible for that trend, Toby, with publishing these great books, like one a year or sometimes two a year, and the signature line not being able to contain it. So between the two of us, I guess we are the culprits.
Well, Eric, I suggest we discuss nothing but me and my brilliant career for the next 45 minutes. But
Sounds great.
the trouble is, we'll lose everybody if we do that. So I'd rather focus on you. And I should say to folks, Eric and I are good friends, but we haven't seen one another for maybe 15 years or
Yeah,
something.
that's right. I
But
think so.
Eric and his family were important people to me when I lived in LA, both intellectually and emotionally. So it's lovely to see you again. And
Yeah, you too. Thanks, Toby. The same.
and my opening gambit, as it were, apart from saying that you've destroyed the world of the business card, although I guess maybe you also helped to stimulate the late life of Tipex, right? Because things had to be corrected in terms of all the entities that you're running if people got a letter wrong. But that aside, uh, my standard query that I put to folks, Prof, is to inquire as to what's currently dynamizing, impeding, interesting, preoccupying you. What's going on for the Prof?
Ooh, um, well, it's a lot. You brought up that we are old friends, Toby, and as you know, I have three children who are now teenagers, and or tweens, and I learn an enormous amount from them, and also keeping up with their activities. Is a lot. In terms of like things that are dynamizing or exciting, I think a lot of it is very either things that are very analog or things that are the opposite, like extremely digital. I fell into that midlife crisis um, dude trap of becoming a vinyl head. And um, it's a disease, I tell you, where you start to really convince yourself that you need that Tom Waits record that's like $35, even though you know it's one of his worst albums, and but you have to finish the collection. So spending time with records and music. And also with film. So at the Wisconsin Center for Film and Theater Research, we have an enormous collection of audiovisual materials, including hundreds of 35 millimeter film prints, thousands of 16 millimeter. And then on the highly digital side, I think AI and its various complexities and frustrations, but also potential for archives has been something I've been thinking a lot about and working with.
For folks interested in the vinyl, by the way, one of the episodes of the podcast from some months ago, maybe last year, is with Michael Palm, who did an ethnography of record factories in the United States, because you are not alone, Prof. Eric. You are not
Yeah.
alone.
Oh yeah. Well, I'll have to look that up.
I think you wrote a book about it too.
Thank you for bringing that up to listeners, but also to me.
Yeah. So I think we'll go back into history, as you've suggested is important for you. But could I begin by talking more about the present? Because whereas a lot of your work is about retrieving lost things or ignored
Yeah.
things and also making them available to people, you're also proactive, a horrible word actually. You're being active in terms of things that aren't yet lost, but perhaps should be, namely podcasts. So can you tell us about what you're archiving and how in what has become this explosion of sound and to a certain extent video?
Yeah, well, thanks for bringing that up. And the person who's not on our podcast today, but who deserves all of the credit for getting that podcaster initiative going is my colleague Jeremy Morris, who I work with at the University of Wisconsin at Madison, a terrific scholar of sound studies and digital media. And really, it was as he was working on a series of articles and eventually a book about podcasting around sort of been around 2015 or so. Um, he was realizing that even some podcasts from 2007, 2008, sort of what we might think of as an earlier era, were no longer retrievable, and also seen, in fact, various internet threads with some of those same creators saying, "Hey, does anyone have my old episodes? Because I don't." And so there was a need to be more um, active, systematic on trying to save these media. And we know this, right? Like I was bringing up film earlier, and we know that during the early periods of a medium, the risk of loss is particularly high. So, right, like only about 11% of films from the silent era remain. Most of early radio is gone. Most of early television is gone. And so we started to work on saving podcasts. We were able to get some funding from our university and a little bit of funding from NEH to work on that. And we sort of took two lines of approach. One was to be very algorithmic, and if anything was in the top 100 in the US, but also we included um, Canada, Australia, and France. If anything was in the top 100, we just subscribed to that feed and saved it to our servers. But of course, that leaves out a lot of interesting, important material. And one of the things that I know has always drawn me to podcasts and fascinated Jeremy and me is the low barrier to entry and the fact that they're right, like you can produce it, you can put it out there in the world. There's also a low exit barrier, kind of like zines, like a lot of them last 3 issues. And like, props to you, Toby, for keeping the pod going for so long. That takes just a tremendous amount of work. And so we also did curation work and working with experts in various fields, experts in Black studies and women's studies, for instance, to make sure that we were capturing podcasts that Apple was not recommending in its top 100, but that are quite important. And then this also became a book that Jeremy and I co-edited. It's called Saving New Sounds, podcast historiography and preservation. And if that sounds interesting to you, you can find it for free on the University of Michigan Press's website. So that was published open access in 2022, I believe, 2021, 2022. So that project is still going. It's still growing, which creates challenges, especially because now it's much more difficult to get the kind of infrastructure funding to add more data storage. But I think the work continues to be really important. And again, it's retrievable through podcaster.org. That's spelled podcast RE. podcast.org, kind of like podcast research, or you can take the French approach, and give it the podcast .org. So thanks for asking, and hope some listeners will check it out.
Well, thanks. And I should say, Eric, I'm actually about to download it myself. One of the
Good.
helpful things about your work in book form is that you've made it, you've no doubt worked and struggled to make it freely available to download, which matters
Mhm.
a lot for those of us who are in the global south, because as I'm sure you're aware, really our libraries do not buy books in English unless they're by Shakespeare and I don't think he even got tenure, right? So a couple of your other books I've been able to download in preparation for this, and it really is a wonderful gift, a wonderful gift. So thank you for that.
Oh,
And
well, and I appreciate you saying that and bringing that up because that's something that's been important to me. And I'm in a privileged position as a tenured professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I'm privileged in many ways too, I'll mention, is I'm not dependent on royalty income for my to make a living. Some people are, and I recognize that, but the university pays me a nice salary. And so I don't necessarily need the royalties. As you and I know, also those royalty checks when they do come from university presses, and this is not to diss on them, it's just a statement of fact. They leave something to be desired. But I'm also privileged in that I can try to allocate and shift resources and apply for grants through the university and sometimes outside it too to make the work open access. Um, what continues to, I guess, surprise me and disappoint me is that not more scholars who have that privilege are doing this. And then what I find just incredibly frustrating is when I hear some of these people talking at various academic conference book rooms, and they like one of the first things they do is that they tell you they just published a new book, congratulations, and then they apologize for how expensive it is. Um, and they're like, but ask your library to buy it. And it's like the libraries don't have money, as you were just mentioning, and that's true in the global South, and it's increasingly true in here in the US and higher ed also, that it's not as if they can just make an infinite number of like $160 purchases to these commercial publishers. And so I really like this is a plea if there's scholars out here listening that before you sign a contract and put yourself potentially in that position of having to apologize for the price of the new book that you've worked so hard for, consider the full range of options and consider open access.
And of course, there are some organizations, this used to be true of the Food and Agriculture Organization, that make everything they do available for free in the global south. I mean, it's obviously tough to check with absolute confidence someone's email address, but if you've got an institutional address in the global south, you can often get things gratis that you couldn't if you were living in Alabama. Now, of course, that can be quite problematic for a lot of residents of Alabama, for example, but it's something. And there used to be also a deal for, what were called third world prices that
Hmm.
publishers would agree to. So as you say, there are alternatives to just saying, oh, crikey. I mean, my latest book just came out with the wealthiest publisher in the world, which has revenues of $1 billion a year, biggest publisher in the world. The price for me to make it available for open access was 13,700 euros.
Oh, that's
Time I'd raised the money, which took months, the deal was off.
hmm.
The deal was off. So very frustrating. So my next book,
It's
I'm
very
actually
frustrating.
going to self-publish because I'm just so sick of this. Gracias. He pagado ya, pero Otra cuenta, porfa, para incluir este té.
Okay.
Vale, gracias. Yeah, so I'm just too frustrated by all this stuff, which
It,
of course means it lacks legitimacy, but it means you'll get 100,000 downloads in a few hours.
yeah, well, and I think it thank you for sharing that and thank you for doing it. I mean, I think once more the more that people who are part of various academic fields who have long careers in publishing um try these things, like I think I hope creating models, and if nothing else, just reminding other students, scholars, people in the public, people who think they might want to get involved, that there's a range of options, and it can look very different, and it increasingly does. And I think, yeah, sometimes that access piece can get overlooked or taken for granted. And I received one of the most meaningful compliments of my entire career at this past Society for Cinema and Media Studies conference. Um, a terrific film historian and professor at a community college in the US came up to me and said, "Thank you for your work on Media History Digital Library, for making that all open access, for making your books open access. We use it in my classes all the time. I have students who are food insecure, housing insecure, right? Like sometimes immigration status insecure. There's our library, our budget resources are depleted. We don't have money to subscribe to these expensive subscription services, and the students don't have the funds to be buying expensive textbooks, and they can use your materials, and they fit into the lessons and the learning. And yeah, I mean, I can't think of a better compliment. It really meant a lot to hear it, and it's those kind of things that make it worthwhile, and keep me going.
Congratulations and good on that professor for speaking to you in that way. And it makes the point that we've already touched on, that yes, there is this divide, global south, global north, but there is a class system of higher education in the United States.
Yes.
And within each class, as it were, there are also class differences. And so if you're working at a big, wealthy, particularly public university with a decent library budget, you can get things that the vast majority of higher education institutions in the United States cannot. So I think it
That's
is important to show it's not just a problem of, US or Western Europe versus the rest. Having said all of that, I want us to go back, as they say in baseball, Prof. And your first book is really before people were talking about free downloads. I think it's fair to say. And this is Hollywood Vault, film
yes.
libraries before home video. Really, as you say, about how things that were thought of as ephemeral actually became commodities a second, third, fourth, fifth time round. And this must go back to your childhood watching Saturday afternoon television.
Oh yeah, it goes back to growing up watching TV, watching lots of videotapes. So I got into movies, especially in the 1990s, growing up in Kansas, right in the middle of the country. Not known as a cinema metropolis, but through video stores, through a public library system, through books about movies. Like I learned so much just paging through Leonard Maltin's guides and getting these like ideas about movies. Most of them, even through the video store system, I wasn't able to retrieve or see. But yeah, sometimes they would pop up on TV, and I was always curious about, yeah, what those kind of engines of circulation were. And then that curiosity continued into my brief my brief career in show business. And I'm so glad that I did this, that after college I moved to Los Angeles. I worked for a time at a big talent agency. I worked for a director. I went to the University of Southern California for producing. That was my entry point, and as a master of the fine art of producing, which it's I kind of love that, as if sure, we have the MFAs who are studying sculpting and glass and painting, and then the MFA of being a showbiz producer. But all of these experiences were very eye-opening. I mean, they were one of the things they were eye-opening about was what I wanted to do with the rest of my life, and realizing that in the long run, I didn't feel like it was bringing out the best in me, or where I really wanted to apply myself, and I wasn't loving being on set for 14 hours, or trying to make deals for 14 hours a day, or any of these things. But they were all, again, really interesting experiences that I'm glad I had. Along the way, one thing that I also noticed and learned about involving film libraries was just how important they were and are to conglomerate media corporations, and in particularly creating barriers to entry against newcomers and new studios getting into the mix. Because if you have an entertainment library that's generating $1 billion a year, or maybe $2 billion a year, from these old assets, that right, like, gives you an engine to do all kinds of things as a business. So I became curious in the story of how that came to be. And I think, like many people, I assumed it was rooted in technology and new technologies. So I brought up home video, and you brought up television, and yes, those are extremely important. But what I also encountered and discovered in my research was that new markets would create sometimes with the existing technology. So there were periods where theatrical reissues were extremely popular and common, and especially in the 1940s in the U.S. At one point, the figures suggest that one out of every four movies on American screens was an older film. That there was a product shortage. Exhibitors could get them for a cheaper price, and there's all these, again, commercial marketplace reasons that these things are happening. Um, and then they have implications for our culture, and for what, again, we were talking about access earlier, like what we have access to, and why, and on what terms. So that's been a cluster of questions that have interested me for a long time. And I'll also just mention, like, that project, Hollywood Vault, emerged from the dissertation I wrote at the University of Southern California, under the just incredible and generous mentorship of our mutual friend Ellen Sider. And Ellen helped me in so many ways in really sharpening the project and making it the best version of itself, academically, but also in, trying to model a lot of the qualities of being a mentor, contributing to the field in generous and constructive ways, and courageous ways, in being willing to speak up.
Yes, Ellen is also a podcast survivor. She was one of the
Yes, yeah.
I recorded with, and I I assume that one's still available. Of the over 950 episodes, only one is comprehensively lost. as in the person whom I did it with doesn't have it. It's not in Podbean. It's not on YouTube. It's not on Apple. I don't have it, like nowhere. It completely disappeared simultaneously. But onto this issue, in the movie Happy Anniversary from the late 50s, David Niven kicks in a TV set. And
Yeah.
this exemplifies the ambiguity and the ambivalence of the studios. First of all, I think it's true to say they really regarded television as the enemy, because the white suburbanization and the comprehensive televisualization of US society after the war, with all the incentives to US returning GIs who were white to buy homes and so on, saw a radical demographic shift that really affected moviegoing. But then they realized there was this second life that you've been describing that included TV. And so they came to embrace it. And you can see an evolution of that to the point where, if you had your own TV show, it meant you were finished as a Hollywood actor. But
Mhm.
now it's again become a second life. It's not that it's all over for you, and now you're doing the Doris Day show, right? It's
Yeah.
because actually this is where stardom can happen.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's so interesting. And I think, um, especially for a certain class of old-time Hollywood executives who, like they're just a basic tenet is if you want to watch it, you got to buy a ticket, and so this medium that's ad supported where you're not bringing in revenue through that, like, people got to pay kind of way, um, was extremely threatening, especially as they were seeing box office decline. You also have people, within Hollywood, even early on, like when television was still in its nascent days, wanting to, see if they could take control, right? Like ultimately television becomes that big threat when Hollywood realizes they're not going to have control, when the FCC is, rewarding NBC and CBS with the airwaves and other perks, and not giving Paramount a wavelength that's only for them, that they can screen things for a fee, right? And there's this history of early attempts of pay TV, including things that seem sort of like, on the one hand, loony, like coin operated boxes. Like we'll just have them on each TV, and once a month someone will go around and empty it out. But like credit cards now do that so efficiently.
I was a child. Many hotels had that,
Yeah,
coin
yeah,
operated TVs.
yeah, yeah. So there's also that yeah, that history um of the integration, the attempts to capitalize, and I find those different mindsets interesting, and they've played out in both new and familiar ways over the last decade, with Netflix in particular moving into that space and disrupting previous norms, but in other ways too, right? Like, do what's the significance of a theatrical release? What does it mean if you will give customers something as part of their subscription, as to, again, that old like mindset of like, you got to buy the ticket if you want to come into the show. I mean, it goes back to the circus. It predates, right? Like movies even. If you want to come into the tent, you got to pay. And if you don't pay, we're gonna chase you out with a stick.
Now, this relates to what draws people in. And as you know, there's a debate going on for almost a century among economists about the efficacy of negative or positive film reviews.
Mhm.
One of your other books is a really wonderful volume that is available for free download, Ink Stained Hollywood. And this is about the so-called trade press or the industry press, still used as a source of gossip, but also many scholars regarding the numbers that it prints as credible, whereas in fact, they're not. They're no more credible than any other numbers that you get in many cases about box office, but they're about the best we can get.
Mhm.
They become influential even when they're fictitious. They come to have a life of their own because of the
Yeah.
that, Friday night and Saturday in the United States means the film's a success or not. Or, ratings for this show are abysmal, so it's over. But in fact, it isn't over because it turns out to be enormously successful in another country with wealthy consumers. That sort of
Oh yeah.
these documents, everything from profiles to accounts of business deals, can be mendacious or inaccurate, and it doesn't matter because they're efficacious. So, having said that, tell us about.
Yeah, no, well, thank you. And I think that is a great lead-in because and hey, here we're talking as the World Cup is going on, which of course has a need for scorekeepers. And Hollywood needs a scorekeeper too. It's an industry that attracts people who are drawn by the allure of not just success, but highly visible success. Um, and who, in the absence of that, also uh, have an appetite for Schadenfreude, and right, like tracking the ups and downs of others. And who are those scorekeepers in the entertainment industry? Historically, it's been the trade press. And here, as we're talking about trade press, talking about publications that are addressing a primarily business audience, and that can look different ways. So in the context of the film industry, there are technical trades, international photographer, American cinematographer, the Journal of the Society for Motion Picture Television Engineers. They're sharing new knowledge that's being gained, techniques, craft. The two other key types of trade papers in the entertainment industry that I spend most of my um, time in the book in Inkstand Hollywood talking about are exhibitor-oriented trade papers. So these are trade papers that imagined movie theater owners and managers as their chief readership. And then secondly, more creative practitioners in Hollywood, let's say, or broadly. And then you have trades like Variety, which is trying to kind of straddle all those and also has always had subscribers from outside the industry who were drawn to it because of its really colorful use of language. And in the case of Variety, so here's some meta scorekeeping for you. One of the things that I talk about in Ink-Stained Hollywood is how Variety, which originated in 1905, primarily covering vaudeville in New York. Like that was the emphasis of Sime Silverman, the editor and publisher. It was a vaudeville paper. Movies came up insofar as they were included within vaudeville programs, and they're covered a bit in the Nickelodeon era. But then there's actually a decline in movie coverage. But when vaudeville is on the decline, starting in the early 1920s, and then especially there's a big fall off after the transition to sound film. Variety makes some really strategic investments into covering more movies. And one of the things that they brag about is that they pan more movies than any of the other trade papers. So there's these box scores, like baseball style box scores that Variety published comparing how many positive reviews they gave over the past 6 months compared to the other trades.
Oh, I didn't know this. This is like Rotten Tomatoes, but
Yeah.
not in terms of telling you what's going on and what the majority view is, but rather look at how we are less captured by the industry than the others.
That's right. And another fascinating trade paper that I talk about in the book is called Harrison's Reports, published by Pete Harrison, based in Philadelphia. And on the cover of every issue of Harrison's Reports, it says, freed from the influence of film advertising. So Harrison's Reports wore this as its badge of honor, that they did not accept ads. And it was really, I mean, Pete Harrison did everything. It was his newsletter. It was like his Substack. And he was not taking ads, and exhibitors were more likely in many cases to trust him, right? Because if that issue of Motion Picture Herald or Moving Picture World you just got, which is loaded in film advertising, um, from Universal, and then you see a glowing review for the new Universal film. Right? You have to wonder how much of this is because of the favorable reviews. So because Pete Harrison wasn't taking that money, he had a certain legitimacy as well. And I think, like, I'm rattling off different names of trade papers, and one of the reasons I wanted to write this book was to answer a question that emerged for me as I was scanning so many of these for Media History Digital Library, which is like, why were there so many? And then it turns out the film industry itself was asking that too. They were like, um, we are a dysfunctional industry. Still true. And they're like, one of the reasons we're dysfunctional is that here you have these bigger American industries like steel. Steel doesn't need all these different trade papers and box scores that are evaluating how the latest batches of steel were rated, but film does. So it became exploring how there were so many different trade papers during this period, especially of the first half of the 20th century, and then also looking at these different functions. So there's the gold, the scorekeeping function I was just talking about. There's a gatekeeping function, right? So like part of even making it into variety at all is an acknowledgement that you're an insider, right? And also Variety famously had very colorful language and lingo, movies were boffo, and this itself, right, also became a marker of, are you inside or out? And so these were all things that interested me uh, a great deal. And yeah, I'm really happy with how the book came out. It was published in 2022 by University of California Press, and as you mentioned, Toby, it's open access. So I'd encourage, like, anyone who's listening who's interested to step into that colorful showbiz world to check out Media History Digital Library's website at mediahist.org, mediahist.org, and you'll find the freely downloadable book there too. And you can look at the underlying materials. So that's another aspect of the project that was important to me, was to make the finished book, right? Like open access, and then also have links that are embedded to the primary sources that I'm discussing and analyzing.
One of the tragedies in my life, one of the great traumas, Prof, is that the original and best NATO, National Association of Theatre Owners,
Yeah.
founded the year before the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, changed its name to Cinema United. I find this very difficult to accept. I do not understand it. I used to read NATO's magazine, as in National Association of Theatre Owners,
Yeah.
rigorously. You mentioned a particular author slash, in a sense, Substack guy. And of course, this is someone you write about in another book that you co-edited, Global Movie Magazine Networks. And in part of your writing in that book, you talk about how this dude wasn't just influential in the US, but in other countries as well, because he
Yeah.
seems to be relatively autonomous from the tentacles of the studios. And so I'm interested in what you found, you guys, when you edited the book, about differences and similarities across the globe when it came to these industry magazines. I also want to know whether you shed a tear for NATO as well.
Um, there's many things that keep me up at night. That has not been one yet. As far as
Cold-hearted, cold-hearted.
the NATO question. I really appreciate the question about global movie magazine networks. That's a book that I co-edited with my colleague here at the University of Wisconsin, Kelly Conway, who's a terrific scholar of French cinema. And it includes 20 essays by different scholars all over the world. Yeah, looking at various film magazines in different international contexts, right? Sometimes rooted in national context, but sometimes transnational as well. And it was part of a larger initiative that was sponsored by the ACLS to globalize the Media History Digital Library's collections and also enhance our user experience and database. And I'm very grateful to the ACLS for that support. One of the great parts of the project was that I got to learn from so many other specialists of global cinema, including my colleague Darshana Mini, who wrote a chapter on Film India. Um, and one of the things that she drew out was that Pete Harrison had a column in film industry in Film India. And also he was treated as like the most foremost authority on film. The editor, Babaro Patel, who we don't have time to go in fully into this, but he's a fascinating figure in India, gets involved in right-wing politics, has his own domain around the film industry. He uh, trumpets the inclusion of Pete Harrison as, as if he was like American cinema's great thought leader. I don't know what. Christopher Nolan and Manohla Dargis and others all rolled up into one, when in reality he was, this like very cranky, curmudgeonly newsletter publisher who addressed independent exhibitors, but his voice and personality took on this other meaning in the Indian context. So there's all kinds of interesting flows that we trace. One of the big takeaways from doing this research was just seeing how hybridity was the norm when it came to movie magazines outside the United States, covering both business or with an address, I should say, to both business readers and popular audiences. That, in other words, within like the Media History Digital Library's website collection, we distinguish these different subcategories of trade papers and then fan magazines. And those, right, like have a discrete sort of like readership to them. But in reality, around most of the world, that's not the case. It's not even entirely the case in the US either. Um, that was really interesting to see how in places ranging from, again, like India to France, um, to South America, like in lots of different contexts. There was an address at the same time to the business and popular audiences. And it was, yeah, it was a rewarding project to work on. And with that one as well, you can find you can find the magazines we've scanned for it online on Media History Digital Library. One really fascinating sub-collection that we developed during the course of this project, working with the New York Public Library, was to digitize a series of Spanish language movie magazines published in the US. So they're published in New York and Los Angeles, but with a readership in mind, that's really looking to the south, as well as to Spain. So the longest running of these magazines that we've scanned are Cinemundial, and Cinelandia, but there's others as well, and it's kind of a fascinating example of how, again, even as we're thinking about talking globally here and talking in different national contexts, you have emerging from the US, right? These Spanish language magazines that have a readership imagined fully outside it.
Of course, there was a huge network of movie theaters showing Spanish language cinema across, especially the southern United States, Texas, California, and so on, for decades, right?
Yeah, that's a very good point too. Yeah, and we were also lucky as part of this project. That's right. I'm glad you brought that up. One group of collaborators on this work was the great team at the University of Houston, recovering the U.S. Hispanic literary heritage team that's done a tremendous amount of work digitizing Spanish language newspapers, especially, who are speaking to exactly that community that you're talking about, Toby.
And Prof, I've got one more question for you. And
Yes, sir.
once you've answered it, I'd like to give you the opportunity to add anything you might wish. And that could take the form of going over terrain we've already traversed, where you've got something else to say, or an entirely new angle that we
Mhm.
haven't discussed.
Yeah.
But my last question is a bit like a promotion committee, which you don't have to worry about anymore, namely, what's on the docket? You're
Ooh.
enormously prodigious as a researcher and a publisher and very erudite. So what's the next thing?
Oh, well, I'm working on two book manuscripts right now. One is highly collaborative. I'm co-authoring it with Ben Pettis, Sam Hansen, and Callan Benjamin, terrific group of researchers who have been doing a lot of the recent work on media history digital library with. And the book is called Publicity Machines, and it's looking at using digital tools, including AI, to go through lots of old Hollywood press books that we've scanned, so publicity materials, and then look for how that kind of press release copy circulated in American newspapers. So th these were Hollywood's attempts, right, to like give canned newspaper reviews. And we figured out some ways to basically like tweak plagiarism testing algorithms to look for this, and we found lots of examples. And so we're writing that up as a book, and I'm excited for how that's going. And then the second book is one that I'm writing solo. So we have the big collaborative like rock band project there, and then I'm doing the solo acoustic album as well, and that is a monograph on the 1983 TV movie The Day After, one of the most highly watched television events in American history, where over 100 million people tuned in for this ABC TV movie to watch nuclear war take place in the heartland. And in fact, right where I grew up in Kansas City and near Lawrence, Kansas, where it was shot. So it's a movie that's always um, fascinated me. And it's a project that I've been thinking about for a long time and working on and off for a long time. But this is the summer that I'm finishing that manuscript.
And
So,
immensely controversial.
oh yeah, big
In,
time.
yeah.
Yeah, do you have any memories with it?
Well, my memory of it is actually about working with someone, but I can't remember who wrote an essay about it, and therefore learning about it very much post facto. In any event, Prof, as I said before, sadly, this is more about you than me. And so, as we come to a close, anything you'd like to add?
Um, I'm trying to think. Thank you for having me on the podcast. I think um the last thing I'll just mention is maybe going back to something that's come up a lot throughout the our discussion today, which is the importance of access and making information and knowledge accessible in, ethical um, ways to audiences across the world, and that can look a lot of different ways. Um, I've spent time trying different versions of this, and the place where you'll be able to find them is on Media History Digital Library website, mediahist.org, which is part of the Wisconsin Center for Film and Theater Research. But there's other possibilities too. So please, everybody, um, keep that in mind. And then maybe if this is like the end credits crawl, I just want to also thank and acknowledge the amazing team that I have the pleasure to work with, and that makes that work possible and even pleasurable. So thank you again to Ben Pettis, Callan Benjamin, Sam Hansen, also Mary Hulsbeck and Amanda Smith, who I lead Wisconsin Center for Film and Theater Research with, and to my other communication arts and WCFTR colleagues. Y'all are the best. So thank you. And thanks again, Toby, for having me.
Thank you for being with us. It's been great to catch up. And as I said earlier, your work's terrific, and it's really presenting, in many cases, a lost world for people, but also allowing for a comprehensive reinterpretation of how to understand the bits of that world that people think they know. So
Yeah.
it's great. Thank you.
Thank you, Toby. What a pleasure.